Part 1. My name is Margaret Halverson, and the first time I realized my daughter-in-law despised me wasn't during an argument or even a quiet insult. It was while she was making pasta in my kitchen, laughing into her phone, and accidentally left her group chat open on my iPad. You might actually regret skipping this part. So before you sit down and listen, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth channel. Now let's listen to this story. She had come over to drop off some groceries, some tomatoes, and a bag of spinach, because she said she knew I'd run out of steam shopping for myself. I brushed the comment off. By then, I was used to her gentle patronizing, like the way she rearranged the mugs in my cabinet or sighed when I asked for help with my router. She always acted like I was one step away from needing a nurse. That day, she made herself comfortable. She poured a glass of wine without asking and said she needed to rest because mothering is exhausting and you wouldn't know. That stung. I had raised her husband with one hand and managed a full-time job with the other. But I said nothing. While the sauce simmered and she took a call on speaker, I noticed my iPad glowing on the kitchen counter. She'd been using it to look up a recipe. I wasn't trying to snoop. I reached over to lock the screen so it wouldn't overheat. But my finger hesitated when I saw a message notification pop up from a group titled Daily Chaos. There were 7 unread messages. The preview read, "Going to see the witch again. Send strength." My stomach tightened. I tapped the notification. The app opened instantly. No password, no Face ID. She hadn't logged out of her account. And there it was, the full thread. Her 2 sisters, a college friend, and what looked like a cousin, all of them chatting casually about me. She keeps calling it her house. Technically, it's in Dad's name now, right? Margaret talks like she invented parenting. OMG, she asked me to bring toilet paper. Is she senile? If I hear about that dumb library job one more time, I'll scream. Honestly, she's exhausting. Toxic. Borderline manipulative. The crying thing. So fake. We should record her sometime. Show the therapist what we're dealing with. Every sentence twisted in my gut like a knife. These weren't just jokes. This was an organized smear campaign. My daughter-in-law, who always smiled so sweetly when she dropped off soup, had been portraying me as some kind of deranged manipulator to an audience. And the worst part? My son David was mentioned too. He won't say anything to her. It's easier to let her sink on her own. David says we should go low contact after the baby. I'm praying for no holidays at her place. Her place, my house. I shut the iPad quietly, placed it face down on the counter, and turned to find her humming, stirring pasta completely unaware. When she saw me watching her, she said, "Hope you like penne." It's the only thing I had energy for. As if she'd just blessed me with a favor. As if she hadn't just gutted me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the kitchen at 2 a.m., made tea, and just sat staring at the iPad. I didn't open the messages again. I didn't need to. I remembered every word. You don't forget when someone calls you a burden. It was strange. You'd think that level of betrayal would ignite rage, but I didn't feel angry. At least, not yet. I felt dislodged. Like my sense of reality had shifted 3 inches to the left, and I couldn't find the edges anymore. For years, I'd accepted her coldness as part of her personality. I thought she was just one of those modern, efficient women who didn't go in for emotion. But it hadn't been efficiency. It had been strategy. She'd wanted me out for a long time. And she had allies. I should have confronted her right then. Marched into her home, shoved the screenshots in her face, demanded answers. But I didn't. I've never been a yeller. Never been one for chaos. Instead, I got quiet. I got still. That's when people underestimate you the most. The next morning, I made a list of things I'd need to do. Learn how to take screenshots on the iPad, back up everything to the cloud. Get advice from someone who understands tech better than I do. I couldn't go to my son, he was part of the silence. I needed an outsider. That's when I remembered Greta from the library. She used to help run digital literacy classes for seniors, and she owed me more than one favor. That morning, while my daughter-in-law posted smiley pictures of her blessed life online, I began documenting everything. And that was only the beginning. The next day was Mother's Day. I woke up to silence. No knock at the door. No phone call. Not even a text message from David. In years past, he would send me flowers, usually late, always from an online service. The first time it happened, I laughed and blamed the florist. By the fifth time, I stopped putting out a vase. This year, there was nothing. It wasn't surprising, not really. For the last several years, Mother's Day had been slowly erased. First came the conflicting plans excuse. Then, a few years ago, I was invited to a brunch they hosted for her mother, and seated on the far end of the table like an extra. I told myself it was a mistake, that they didn't mean to put me beside the diaper cake instead of with the family. But that year, when the group photo was taken and I wasn't asked to join, I started to wonder if I was erasing myself by staying so quiet. This time, I didn't wait for a knock. I got dressed, put on some lipstick. A soft rose, the same shade David always said made me look extra warm, and walked to the porch. It was warm for May, the kind of weather that carried the scent of distant barbecue smoke and cut grass. I watched cars drive by. A couple of neighbors waved. I waved back. I kept hoping maybe they'd stop by later in the day. Maybe they'd say they were planning a dinner, or that the morning had just gotten away from them. But as the sun began to dip behind the maple tree in my yard, the reality sat heavy. They weren't coming. And this time, I wasn't making excuses. Around 7:00 p.m. I heard the familiar ding of my iPad. It was a photo message. From David. I opened it. It was a picture of him, my daughter-in-law, and their baby at brunch. Her parents were there. Her sister, too. Everyone was holding mimosas. My son smiled, his arm slung over his wife's shoulder. The message read, "Hope you're having a peaceful day, Mom. Love you." That was it. No invite. No apology. Just a snapshot of what I wasn't a part of, dressed up in the polite costume of affection. I wanted to cry, but not because I was hurt. I wanted to cry because I finally saw the full picture. Not just the chat, not just the neglect, but the truth of where I stood. Mother's Day was always an afterthought. Not because they were busy, not because they forgot, but because I wasn't central to their lives anymore. And when someone isn't central, they become optional. When someone's optional, they can be erased. But here's the thing about librarians. We know what gets erased. And we always know how to recover lost texts. Later that night, I called Greta. She was delighted to hear from me. Retired now, she'd taken up birdwatching and ran a little genealogy blog. But more importantly, she still knew her way around digital tools. I didn't explain everything over the phone. I just said I needed help saving some messages. She didn't ask questions. Greta had always been like that, sharp, discreet, loyal to the bone. She came by the next morning wearing those enormous pink sunglasses she refused to upgrade. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd read the chat, and I handed her the iPad. Within 30 minutes, she had screen recorded the entire thread, exported it, uploaded it to a private folder, and even emailed me backup copies. She looked at me after and said, "You don't need to tell me what this is for, but if you ever do, I'm here." After she left, I took a walk. I passed the church where I used to help with bake sales, the park where I once watched David play t-ball. All these places that held fragments of a life I thought I was still part of. But I wasn't. I was a character in their group chat, a villain in their family myth, a name passed around like a cautionary tale. And for once, I didn't try to make it better. I didn't try to smooth the rough edges of their intentions. I let their words sit inside me like stones, real, heavy, cold, but also unbreakable. Because now I had proof. And even though I hadn't decided what to do with it yet, I knew one thing for certain. The next time she called me cruel in public, I wouldn't stay silent. There's a kind of warfare that exists in families, quiet, passive, often sugar-coated with smiles and birthday cards. My daughter-in-law was a master of it. She didn't insult me outright. That would have been too easy to identify, too easy to confront. No, her weapons were subtler, camouflaged as jokes, compliments that came with stingers, suggestions framed as concern. But every word chipped away at my dignity like wind on stone. At first, I dismissed them. We all have different personalities, I told myself. She's just assertive, direct. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But then the patterns started to show. Like the time she brought a cake for David's birthday and said, "I made this from scratch," because, not everyone can just stop by a bakery every year. Everyone laughed. But she looked at me when she said it. She always looked at me. Or when I mentioned that I'd reorganized the attic and she responded, "Oh, you're still going up there alone. That's brave." Even her compliments twisted like vines around a trap. When I made lasagna for dinner one weekend, she took a bite and said, "It's really amazing how well this turned out, considering the kitchen you're working with." I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I was being overly critical, but my heart knew better. There's a feeling that comes when you're being slowly erased, not loudly, not violently, but methodically, like someone using an eraser the size of a fingertip to scrub you from the page. The worst part, David never noticed. Or maybe he did and chose not to. One evening, I was helping fold baby clothes in the living room. She'd dropped off a whole load because their dryer wasn't working, though. I noticed it miraculously worked for her gym clothes. She sat across from me on her phone, scrolling occasionally, snickering. Then she said, "You know, my therapist says boundaries are important. Like not always trying to fix everything." I paused mid-fold. I didn't think I said. She looked up, all wide-eyed innocence. No. I mean, in general, you have such a helper vibe. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, especially for new moms." There it was. The sly insinuation. The casual put-down disguised as advice. "I just thought you might want to know," she added before returning to her screen. And like a fool, I smiled and nodded. Because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. But I was starting to remember who I was before her. The woman who ran the school library during budget cuts and still made time to tutor kids after hours. The woman who took in her sister's children after the accident without blinking. The woman who held her husband's hand for 6 months straight through chemo until the end. I was not weak. I was not unstable. And I was not cruel. But I was tired. That night, I wrote it all down. Every jab, every backhanded compliment, every instance I let slide. I filled 4 pages in my old composition notebook, the kind we used to lend out to kids who forgot theirs. As I wrote, something began to harden in me. Not bitterness, but clarity. She wanted me gone. Not in the dramatic sense. She didn't want to throw me out. She wanted to push me into the background so slowly I wouldn't realize it was happening until I was all the way gone. A whisper instead of a presence. And David, he was letting her. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he thought it was easier to keep peace by staying silent. But silence, I realized, can be just as loud as cruelty, especially when it comes from someone you raised. The next week, we all went to dinner for David's birthday. I offered to pay, as I always did. She picked the restaurant, a trendy spot downtown with loud music and overpriced cocktails. The hostess sat us at a tiny table near the kitchen. She ordered for the table without asking me. When the dessert came, the waiter brought a candle. She looked at me and said, "Don't worry, Margaret. I didn't get you one. I know sugar's a concern at your age." That was when I saw it. The little twitch in David's jaw. The flicker of something like shame. He didn't speak. But he looked down and didn't look up again for a while. Progress, I thought. But it wasn't enough. They were building a world where I was a punchline. And I wasn't going to stay the joke. David used to call me every Sunday. Even when he moved to college, even during residency, he never missed a week. We talked about nothing in particular. The weather. The old neighbor's dog. A book he was reading. He always ended with "Love you, Mom." I'd smile and say it back, hearing the sincerity in his voice. But lately, those calls had gone missing. When I asked him if he was too busy to talk, he said things like, "Just slammed this week," or "Elena and the baby need more structure." I told him I understood, but I didn't. Not really. There's a particular heartbreak when the person who once saw you as their home now sees you as something to manage. The following week, I dropped off a quilt I had sewn for the baby. Hand-stitched soft flannel in pastel blues and greens. It had taken me months. I left it on their porch, rang the bell, and walked back to my car. I waited there for a few minutes just to see. She opened the door, looked down at the bag, picked it up like it was something forgotten, like an Amazon return that had landed on the wrong porch. No text. No thank you. I watched her set it down on the entry table and walk away. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. Weeks passed. No acknowledgement of the quilt. No calls from David. Just scattered texts about holiday plans that included the phrase, maybe just the nuclear family this year and we'll swing by for a bit. They didn't swing by. On Thanksgiving, I roasted a chicken instead of a turkey. I didn't set the big table. I used a TV tray and ate in front of an old movie. I wasn't lonely. I was documenting. The hardest part was realizing how fast people forget your sacrifices when it's no longer convenient to remember them. I thought of the nights I sat up with David during fevers, the time I skipped a promotion to stay home with him after the divorce. I remembered the way he used to squeeze my hand at school recitals, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. That boy was still in there somewhere. But the man he'd become didn't have room for his mother. Not unless it benefited the story his wife wanted to tell. And the story she was telling? I was overbearing, over-involved, intrusive. That was the role she cast me in, even if I hadn't said a word. So I decided I would start talking. Not to them. Not yet. To myself? I bought a small black notebook, leather-bound, lined crisp. I titled the first page, "What I Would Say If They Let Me Speak." Every day I wrote something. A memory. A sentence. A retort I never said. A fact they'd twisted. I filled 10 pages the first night. Then another 10. I wrote down the birthday I spent waiting by the phone. The time she asked me to babysit for 3 days straight with no thank you. The day I heard her tell a friend on speakerphone I wish David's mom would just fade, fade. It echoed in my head, over and over. That's when I knew I needed a plan. I wasn't going to fade. I wasn't going to lash out either. That would be too easy to dismiss. They'd call it hysteria. Call me emotional, unstable, dramatic. No, I wanted something colder, clearer. I wanted the truth. Their truth. In their words. So I went back to the group chat. It was still there. She hadn't logged out of her account on my iPad. Either she trusted I wouldn't snoop, or she truly believed I wasn't smart enough to know how. I copied every message. I organized them by date, by topic, by who said what. I printed screenshots. I created a folder labeled "For When the Lies Get Too Loud." It was time. Not for revenge, but for clarity. They thought I was fragile. They were about to see how strong silence could be until it breaks. Thanksgiving passed without a word from them. No leftover pie, no baby photos, not even a guilt-laced check-in. By the time December rolled around, I had stopped waiting. I wasn't idle. While they lived their curated lives, I was preparing. I'd decided to keep my calm. Stillness was power. Rage would only play into their story. And I knew Elena, she would love nothing more than to play victim if I lashed out. But even the most patient person has a line. That line came at a charity brunch. My friend Judith invited me. It was one of those community events where every table was decorated in a theme, and the food was catered from upscale restaurants, trying to win favor with the local socialites. I wasn't going to go at first. I hadn't been out much. But Judith insisted, and I owed her for always being in my corner. We arrived early, got seated near the front, and chatted over tea. The room slowly filled with women in pastels and pearls, the kind of crowd Elena adored. The kind of crowd she wanted to be queen of. And then she walked in. She saw me immediately but didn't come over. Instead, she made a point of greeting every other table, hugging and smiling, laughing just a little louder when she was near mine. She was wearing one of those cream-colored wrap dresses, hair styled in soft waves, baby photos tucked under her arm. David wasn't with her. Eventually, she reached my table. "Oh, Margaret," she said with a pout. "I didn't know you'd be here. I wish I had saved you a seat at our table, Mom's there. You know, and the baby's photo board." Her voice carried just enough for nearby heads to turn. Always aware of optics, always managing perception. I nodded politely. "Lovely to see you, Elena." She didn't like that. There was no warmth to cut down. No defensive energy to manipulate. "Oh, by the way," she added, tilting her head, "we've been meaning to talk to you. The holidays are just so hectic this year. We're thinking of starting some new traditions, simplifying things. Hope you understand." I smiled again. "Of course." Then she did it. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and with syrupy sweetness said, "David and I feel like, well, sometimes your energy is a little intense. We don't want the baby to pick up on any negativity. I'm sure you get it." The words were surgical, But before I could respond, she stood straight, smoothed her dress, and turned to leave. "Oh," she said over her shoulder, loud again, "and don't worry about the quilt." I gave it to the shelter. They were so grateful. A few women gasped. I heard one whisper, "That was her quilt." I sat frozen. In that moment, she framed me, made me sound like a bitter old woman whose gifts were tainted with bad energy. She'd planted the seed. She was the sweet daughter-in-law trying to protect her family from my cruelty. And then I saw Judith's face. Horrified. That's when I knew. It was time. I didn't leave early. I stayed. I smiled. I even complimented her shoes. But inside, the final thread had snapped. I went home that night and took the folder out from its drawer, labeled dated tabbed. She wanted a stage. I'd give her one. The invitation came a week later, handwritten on embossed stationery tucked inside a cream envelope with gold edging. Christmas brunch, family and friends. Hosted by David and Elena. It was addressed to Margaret Halverson, not Mom. The choice was deliberate. They wanted me to know my role had changed. I wasn't the heart of the family. I was now a guest, a formality. Something you invite to keep up appearances, like that crystal bowl no one actually uses. I turned the envelope over in my hands and smiled. This would be it. I RSVP'd yes. For the next few days, I worked like I was preparing for war. Not with malice, but with precision. Every page of the group chat, every screenshot, the ones where she called me unfit, overbearing, paranoid. The message where she said, "The way she hugs the baby gives me the creeps." The audio note, yes, audio, where she told someone, if she dropped dead, I'd send flowers from Whole Foods and move on. I saved them all, not to be cruel. To be clear, there was no room left for illusions now. The mask she wore in public was about to fall, not because I ripped it off, but because she fastened it too loose. I printed everything, every page, every message, every timestamp. I placed them neatly into a cream-colored folder with gold edging. The irony made me laugh. Then I waited. Christmas morning came. I wore a navy wool dress, simple pearls, the perfume David had given me one year when he was still proud to say I was his mother. I curled my hair and added a dab of lipstick. When I arrived, the house was full of voices, laughter, warmth. People moving in and out of rooms, the scent of cinnamon and cloves in the air. She greeted me with wide arms. "Margaret, I'm so glad you made it." I let her hug me. I even hugged back. Her parents were there, of course. Her mother looked me over like I was something she had to tolerate in a group photo. Her father gave me a half smile and went back to his eggnog. David came out from the kitchen. He looked tired. But when he saw me, something flickered in his expression. I couldn't name it, but it wasn't cold. Maybe memory. Maybe guilt? He gave me a side hug. "Glad you're here, Mom." I nodded and said nothing. We sat for brunch. They placed me between Elena's aunt and one of her friends from Pilates women who knew nothing about me and seemed fine keeping it that way. The table was dressed like something out of a magazine. Silverware lined in perfect symmetry. Holiday napkins folded into miniature trees. Elena loved perfection. She needed it like oxygen. Halfway through brunch, she stood. Before dessert, she said brightly, "I want to thank everyone for being part of our lives. It's been a whirlwind year, and we're so lucky to have such an incredible support system." A few people clapped. She smiled, then turned to me. "And I want to acknowledge Margaret, who has been persistent and very involved. Sometimes it's hard to set boundaries, but we're learning. Right, Margaret?" She was daring me. I looked up, took a breath, and placed the folder on the table. Her smile faltered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply opened it, slid a page to her, then another. Then I passed a few down to David. Her friend beside me leaned in to read. Her aunt adjusted her glasses. The room grew quiet. David picked up one of the pages. It was the one where she joked about me having dementia. The next page was the audio transcript. Then the photo of the group chat with all their names. I didn't say a word. Elena stood frozen, her face pale. Someone whispered, "What is this?" I turned to her, calm as glass. "I've been called a lot of things, but I won't be called cruel." And I let the silence work its magic. No one filled it, because there was nothing they could say. It's strange how quickly warmth can drain from a room. just minutes before the dining room had pulsed with holiday chatterforks clinking against fine china, polite laughter echoing under the tinkle of piano Christmas carols. But now the air had changed. Heavy, dense, the kind of silence people instinctively fill with breath-holding not words. Elena stood frozen. Her hand hovered mid-air, still holding the dessert server like she was about to cut the cake. Her smile, the one she wore like armor, had shattered into something closer to confusion or fear. David kept reading. I watched his eyes scan the page, then jump to the next. His brow furrowed, his lips tightened, one page after another. Group chat screenshots, typed comments, timestamps, her words, her friends, even his own name referenced in passing, usually as a passive figure who wouldn't push back. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Across the table, one of Elena's friends slowly slid the printout back toward me. She didn't meet my eyes. Her appetite was gone. Good. Elena tried to speak. Margaret, this feels out of context. I held up my hand gently. Not a scolding gesture. Not a warning. Just a pause. Then I turned to the folder again. There's more, I said softly. I handed another set of pages to her mother, then one to her father, then to the aunt beside me. It wasn't a tantrum. It was evidence. A presentation. And that was what made it so damning, because I didn't need to say a word. Her mother gasped. Her eyes locked on a message where Elena described me as a fossil who won't die quietly. I saw her fingers twitch against her napkin as if holding back the urge to tear it. Elena's voice cracked. You're embarrassing yourself? Finally, I looked up. No, I let you embarrass me for 2 years. I let you poison holidays, steal moments with my son, turn me into a villain in your mind because it made your life simpler. I looked around the table. But here's the truth. What you've done, what you've said, and how you've treated me. This is your story now, not mine. David set the pages down slowly. He didn't look at me yet. Did you know about this? I asked him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't answer. Elena reached for his arm. David. He pulled away. Just slightly, but it was enough. The table sat in stunned silence. Finally, Judith, who had joined the brunch late and was seated at the very end, spoke. I think Margaret's shown a lot of restraint. If someone spoke about my mother like this, we'd be having a very different conversation. A few people nodded. One of Elena's cousins whispered something and stood to leave the table. Elena was crumbling. Right there in front of her curated crowd. She turned to me, face red now, jaw tight. You don't know what it's like having someone constantly trying to insert themselves. Always offering opinions, always hanging around. I was trying to set boundaries. I nodded slowly. I didn't need to insert myself. I was your family. She flinched. And offering support isn't the same as control. But lying about someone, turning friends and family against them, that's not boundaries. That's sabotage. I stood. I'm done pretending not to notice. I'm done accepting breadcrumbs. And I'm done being erased. The baby monitor crackled from the kitchen. For a moment, the room held its breath, as if waiting to see if a child's cry would somehow reset the scene. It didn't. I picked up the folder, slid it back into my tote, and turned to David. I hope someday you find your voice again. Because she's using it for both of you right now. Then I walked out. No one stopped me. The drive home was silent. No radio. No thoughts pressing their way to the front. Just the soft hum of tires on asphalt and the glow of traffic lights coloring the windshield. Red, green, yellow, like signals waiting for me to respond. But I didn't. I had no words left to say. Not yet. My house was dark when I pulled up. The porch light flicked on automatically. The snow had started to fall, a quiet, drifting kind of snow that softens everything it touches. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the doorknob, just breathing in the stillness. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The candles still unlit on the mantel. The wrapped gifts still under my tree, small tokens I had bought weeks ago, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would come by. No one had. I took off my coat, laid my tote bag on the table, and poured myself a cup of peppermint tea. The folder stayed closed. I didn't need to look at it again. It had served its purpose. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought the silence would feel heavier than it ever had before, but it didn't. It felt earned, like the closing of a door that should have been shut a long time ago. I woke up to 3 missed calls. David, twice, and one from an unknown number I assumed was Elena's mother. I didn't call back. Instead, I got dressed, cleaned out a drawer of old greeting cards, and packed away the baby photos they'd sent me. All 2 of them, both cropped from larger group shots. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the park. I brought my journal, the leather one where I'd been writing the truths I was too afraid to say aloud, and I sat on a bench under a leafless oak tree. I wrote, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away before someone convinces you you're the problem." It felt like closure. When I returned home, there was an envelope on my porch. No postage, no note. Inside were the shredded pieces of the quilt I'd made. No explanation. Just that, for a few seconds, my hands trembled. I stood there in the cold, the bag crinkling in my grip. Then I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and slid the lock with calm fingers. This was a declaration. She wanted me to know I hadn't broken her, that she still had power, that she could still be cruel. But she didn't realize something vital. I wasn't the one who had shattered. I was the one who had let go. You can't threaten someone with isolation if they've already found peace in solitude. So I gathered the scraps of that quilt and laid them out on my table like a puzzle. Every frayed edge, every tiny square that had once been sewn with care, and I made something new, a patchwork of grief, a monument to what I'd loved, what I'd lost, and what I would never allow again. I called Greta. I told her everything. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't ask, "Why didn't you act sooner?" She simply said, "Come over. I have wine and chocolate." That night, we sat on her patio under a string of dim white lights, and we laughed until our sides hurt. Not about the pain, but about how long we'd accepted it in silence. She told me stories of her sister-in-law, her college roommate, her first heartbreak. And I told her how my house had felt smaller and smaller each time David visited. How every tiny remark from Elena had built up like mold in the walls, silent, toxic, unspoken. And how freeing it was to finally crack open the truth. "I don't want revenge," I said. She raised her glass. "You already got it. It's called freedom." We clinked glasses. For once, I believed her. The first few weeks of the new year passed without a word from David. Not a text. Not an apology. Just silence. At first I thought maybe he was choosing sides. Maybe the weight of Elena's performance at Christmas was enough to keep him tethered to her version of the truth. Or maybe he just didn't know what to say to me anymore. Shame has a way of muting people. But deep down, I knew something had cracked in him that day. That quiet retreat of his hand when she tried to touch him. That look in his eyes when he read her messages, like seeing something in a language he'd never understood before, and finally realizing what it meant. Still, I didn't wait. I moved forward. One afternoon, I found myself in a little secondhand shop downtown. The kind of place that smells like old paper and cedar oil, full of things that once belonged to other people's stories. As I browsed, I struck up a conversation with the woman behind the counter, Erica, a former editor who had recently bought the place after her husband died. We connected easily. She asked what I used to do, and when I told her I'd been a librarian for 42 years, her face lit up. "I've been looking for someone to help catalog our archives," she said. "We have boxes of old books, but I want to make it something special. A reading space upstairs, maybe even events. But I'm too disorganized." That's how I ended up back in the rhythm of purpose. 2 weeks later, I was sorting through boxes in a drafty loft above her shop. Wooden floors, brick walls, big bay windows that looked out onto the street. Dusty, chaotic, perfect. I hadn't felt so alive in years. There was something poetic about it. Building a sanctuary from other people's forgotten things. Giving life to what had been discarded. Creating a space for stories to be seen and heard again, just like I'd done for myself. And then one morning, as I was unpacking a crate of travel books from the 1950s, my phone buzzed. "David." I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Mom?" His voice was quieter than I remembered. "I was wondering if I could come by alone." I paused. "Why?" There was silence on the other end. Then, because I think I've been watching a story that wasn't real, and I'd like to hear yours. We agreed on a time, Sunday afternoon. I didn't rush to clean the house. I didn't bake. I didn't set a table or make tea. I didn't perform. When he arrived, he looked different. Not disheveled, just less polished. Like someone who had walked through a storm and hadn't found dry clothes yet. He stepped inside, looked around like he was entering a place he barely remembered. We sat in the living room. I read everything again, he said. Not just what you showed. I found more. In her emails, in her notes. I waited. She told people things that weren't true. About you. About what you said. She'd been building that version of you for a long time. Still, I said nothing. I let it happen. I didn't want conflict. I thought keeping the peace was the same as being loyal. Then he looked at me. But I wasn't loyal to you. And I see that now. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't want to lose you completely. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, I'm not angry anymore, David. But that's gone. His shoulders sagged. I am sad, I added. Sad that you had to read it to believe it. Sad that it took so much silence to finally make noise. He nodded slowly. I could see it, the man he used to be, trying to surface again. Struggling. But present. I've moved on in many ways, I told him. Not from you, but from the version of family I thought we were. I'm building something else now. His voice cracked. Can I be part of that? I thought about it. Then I said yes. But you'll have to meet me where I am. Not where she told you I live. He nodded again, tearfully this time. We didn't hug, not right away. But we sat there side by side, the space between us, no longer full of pretense or poison. Just air, clear, earned. In the weeks that followed, David came by more often. Never with Elena, never with the baby. Just him, quiet, tentative, showing up with small offerings like coffee or a newspaper he thought I'd like. It was as if he were relearning how to be a son. Every visit was a step forward, and I let him take them at his own pace. We talked mostly about the past. Not the messy parts, those would come later, but the soft memories. Our camping trip when he was 10. The time he broke his arm and I stayed overnight on the hospital cot. The school project we finished with a flashlight during a blackout. I could see it happening. The scaffolding in his mind, the version of me Elena had constructed, was coming down. Piece by piece. And underneath he was rediscovering the real foundation. But with every moment of reconnection came a shadow of pain. Because the baby wasn't there, and Elena's silence was loud. I didn't ask him about her. Not directly. I didn't want to trigger his defenses or worse, his guilt. I knew that if he was going to confront the truth fully, it would have to come from inside him, not from me. One rainy Sunday, we sat in the bookstore loft sharing a plate of almond cookies Erica had made. He looked at me, then down at his hands. She's not the person I thought she was. I stayed quiet. He looked up again. I still love her, but I think I built her into something in my mind. Someone safer, someone softer. And now, I asked. She's unraveling, saying I betrayed her, that I chose you over her, that I embarrassed her by letting you speak at Christmas. He paused. But the truth is, I didn't let you do anything. You did what I couldn't. You told the truth. That admission cracked something in both of us. For the first time, I saw him as more than my son. I saw him as a man facing the consequences of silence, a man trying to untangle loyalty from fear. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I want to fix this, he said. You can't fix everything, I replied. But you can stop pretending nothing's broken. He nodded, eyes glossy. I thought maybe that would be the hardest part. But it wasn't. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten note. From Elena. The envelope was pale pink. Heavy stock paper. My name in perfectly looped cursive. Inside, one page. Folded neatly. Scented faintly with her perfume. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time just to be sure. It was by all appearances an apology. She used words like misunderstood and miscommunication. She acknowledged some regrettable language. She said she hoped we could heal for the sake of the family. But nowhere did she say I lied. Not once did she admit that what she said was false. That the version of me she shared with others was manipulated, twisted, curated to make herself the victim. It was a public apology without accountability. A PR move, not repentance. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer where I kept old bills and warranties. Things you don't need to see often, but might someday reference in a dispute. I wouldn't respond, because I had nothing left to prove. The next weekend, David brought the baby over. He didn't say it was happening. He didn't ask for permission. He just showed up with a diaper bag, a bottle, and a nervous look on his face. I told her he said that I needed time to reconnect. That if we were going to be a family, it couldn't be one where silence was our foundation. He placed the baby in my arms. She looked up at me with those round, curious eyes, so open, so unclouded by the things we adults build around ourselves. She didn't shrink away. She didn't cry. She simply stared, then smiled. And just like that, I felt it again. Not hope, not victory, but presence. I existed. I mattered. And I was no longer erased. The baby's name was June. I hadn't said it out loud since she was born, not because I didn't want to, but because no one had invited me to. Now with her in my arms, it felt like a secret being returned. June. She fit perfectly in the crook of my elbow, her tiny fingers curling around mine like they had something to tell me. Her eyes, pale gray with flecks of green, studied me, as if trying to remember. David sat across from me, uncharacteristically quiet. No phone in hand, no half excuses to leave. Just present, watching. You want to hold her while I make a bottle? He asked. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. He disappeared into the kitchen, and for a while it was just me and June wrapped in a silence so full it felt like music. I whispered stories to her. About the day she was born and how I waited by the phone. About how I'd folded the quilt with trembling hands, hoping her small body would one day rest in it. About how I'd memorized the weight of her name before ever holding her. She didn't understand, of course, but some part of her listened. When David returned, he handed me the bottle but didn't take her. He sat beside me watching as she latched those big eyes fluttering closed in sleepy rhythm. I didn't realize, he said after a while, how much I'd cut out by staying silent. I didn't respond. I just nodded, gently rocking the child who until now had only existed for me in filtered photos. She says I betrayed her, he added. Still, I said nothing. She's not wrong. I did. He looked at me, the corners of his eyes wet. But I don't regret choosing truth, even if it costs me everything. I looked down at June, who had just finished her bottle, her lips still puckered in a dream. You haven't lost everything, I said. You're right here. He exhaled long and heavy. We sat there for hours, talking, not talking, watching June nap on my chest. She smelled like baby shampoo and warm cotton, a scent that carried memories I'd long buried. David told me things I didn't expect. About the early days of his marriage, how Elena had always been private, guarded, dismissive of emotional things. How she was charming with friends, but distant with his side of the family. How over time she planted small doubts in his mind, made him question his memories, his instincts. She's not a monster, he said. She's just deeply insecure and very, very good at getting ahead of the story. I nodded. I believed her version of you because it was easier than confronting what I knew deep down. There it was again. That quiet admission. That peeling away of illusion. And now, I asked. I don't know, he admitted. I want her to get help. But I also want to protect June. I don't want her growing up in a house where truth gets punished. I gently placed June in the portable bassinet David had brought. She stirred, then settled again. I looked at him. You know what you have to do, I said. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. As dusk fell, he packed up June's things and stood at the door. I want to come back, he said. With her? Often. You're welcome here, I said. But I won't pretend anymore. I won't rewrite myself to make someone else comfortable. He nodded. That's fair. Then he hesitated. She's not going to let this go quietly. I know. He rubbed his hands over his face. There might be a fight coming. I walked him to the porch. Then be ready to tell the truth again, I said. And again. And again. Until the lie isn't louder anymore. He looked at me. Then reached out, pulled me into a long, full hug. I love you, Mom. I held him tighter than I had in years. I love you too, David. I always have, even when I didn't recognize you. The fight came sooner than either of us expected. 3 days after David's visit, Elena showed up at my front door, unannounced, uninvited. She wore black leggings, a gray wool coat, and no makeup, a deliberate move. The message was clear. She wanted to look tired, soft, fragile, like someone on the verge of collapse, not someone who had orchestrated a campaign of quiet cruelty. I opened the door slowly, not surprised, just braced. She smiled, small, tight. "Hi, Margaret." I didn't return it. "Elena, can we talk?" I stepped aside. She walked in like she owned the place. Her eyes flicked over the furniture, the family photos, the bookshelf where June's ultrasound still lived, tucked between a photo of David at 5 and one of my late husband. She sat on the edge of the couch like it might bite her. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." She started crossing her legs carefully. I sat opposite her, folding my hands in my lap. "I know you're upset, and I understand why you felt attacked. But the messages, they were venting. I didn't expect you to see them." I tilted my head. "Because you thought I wouldn't understand how to open an app." She blinked. "No," she said, voice softer. I wasn't thinking, and I regret that. Deeply regret, not remorse. I could see it already. This wasn't an apology. This was damage control. You called me a burden, said I was manipulative. You implied I was unwell. I was overwhelmed," she said quickly. "Postpartum was hard. I was venting to my friends. That's all. Then why were you planning to go low contact? Why did you mock my gifts? Why did you turn my son against me?" Her mouth tightened. "I didn't turn him against you. David chose to believe you. And that hurts, Margaret. It hurts that you're trying to break up our family." There it was. The weapon she always returned to, reframing the wound as her own. "Elena," I said calmly, "I'm not trying to break up your family. I'm trying to stop mine from being broken further." She didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked to the fireplace, picked up a framed photo of David and me from his graduation. "He was so sweet back then," she said. "Still performing." "I didn't come here to fight," she continued. "I came because if we're going to move forward, we need to let this go. For June." I stood. "For June, yes. Which is why I'll never again pretend to be someone I'm not, just to keep the peace. If you want to rebuild anything with me, it starts with truth. Not justifications. Not narrative shifts. Truth." She turned slowly. "I'm willing to work on it," she said. "But David needs to understand that loyalty matters." I walked to the door, opened it. "That's between you and David," I said. "I won't be your scapegoat anymore." She stared at me, cold now, the mask slipping. "You think you've won." I think I finally told the truth out loud. "And you're the one who lost control." She stepped out onto the porch. The wind was sharp, and she wrapped her coat tighter. "Don't expect an easy path forward," she said. "I don't," I replied. "But I expect a truthful one." She left without another word. I closed the door, exhaled deeply, and leaned against it for a long moment. No trembling, no second thoughts. Just clarity. The war had always been waged in whispers. I had simply turned on the lights. The aftermath didn't explode, it unraveled. In the days following Elena's visit, the silence returned, but it felt different this time. Not heavy, not ominous, just quiet. A quiet earned through exposure, not fear. David texted me later that night. "She came by, told me everything. I'm sorry." That was all he wrote. And yet I knew how much weight he was carrying behind those few words. When someone finally sees the truth, it doesn't just free the person who's been wronged, it shatters the reality of the one who stood idly by. Still, I didn't reply. Not immediately. I needed space. Not to punish, but to breathe. Instead, I walked through the old part of town, past the corner bakery with its frosted windows, past the shuttered movie theater where I once took David for matinees. The world hadn't changed. I had. And with that change came a decision. I would no longer be someone's passive burden or plot point. That weekend, Erica asked if I'd like to host a reading circle in the bookstore loft. I said yes. We put out folding chairs and hung a string of soft yellow lights. I chose the first book, Beloved by Toni Morrison. Not an easy read, but one full of ghosts' legacy and women reclaiming their voices. 12 women showed up. Some brought cookies, others brought stories. And slowly, over coffee and old paperbacks, we created a space where every voice mattered. Where history, Personal, painful, and powerful could be shared without being weaponized. It felt like family. And for the first time in a long while, that word didn't sting. On the third meeting, David came. He didn't speak during the discussion, just listened. Afterwards, he stayed behind while I stacked chairs. "I've started therapy," he said quietly. I stopped what I was doing, looked at him. "Elena wouldn't come with me, but I'm going anyway." "That's brave," I said. "It's necessary," he replied. I let things grow in silence. I saw what she wanted me to see, and I didn't ask the questions I should have. He took a breath. "She said you'd forgive me because mothers always do." I didn't respond. He looked up. "Will you?" I walked to the window, looked out at the street below. "I forgave you the moment you came back," I said. "But trust, that rebuilds slowly." He nodded. "I want June to know you," he said. "I want her to know herself," I replied. "Not the version someone else decides for her." He walked over, placed a small framed photo on the windowsill. It was from our last visit, me holding June. Both of us smiling. No filters, no cropping, just presence. "I want her to see that every time she comes here," he said. That evening, I lit a candle and sat in my reading chair with the photo in view. I didn't know what David's marriage would become. I didn't know what choices Elena would make next. But I knew this. My voice had returned. And I would never give it up again. Spring arrived slowly that year, but when it came, it was bold thawing ice in great gulps, pushing crocuses up through stubborn soil, letting the sunlight linger just a little longer each evening. I found myself opening the windows more often, letting fresh air into rooms that had once felt too heavy with memories. The quiet no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like space. David continued to come by, sometimes with June, sometimes alone. Always with something thoughtful in hand, a book he thought I'd like a homemade soup. He swore he made from scratch, though I could taste the grocery store in it. The efforts mattered more than the results. And each time I saw more of the son I remembered. The boy who used to ask big questions and wait for real answers. He was back even if it took peeling away the layers someone else had draped over him. Elena, meanwhile, faded into the background. Not completely. Her presence remained in the occasional passive-aggressive text. She sent David words like distancing sabotage and manipulated peppering her messages. But the heat of her campaign had cooled. She was no longer trying to wage war through whispers. She was regrouping, but I wasn't afraid anymore, because now I had allies. A circle of women at the bookstore who'd been through their own battles, divorces, estrangements, betrayals. We shared stories that weren't clean or polished. Stories that had grit and grief and still somehow hope. One afternoon after the reading group ended, a woman named Loretta pulled me aside. "You ever feel like you survived a war no one else knew was happening?" she asked. I smiled. "Every day." "Good," she said, "because now you get to choose how the peace looks." That stuck with me. Peace wasn't silence. It wasn't surrender. It was permission. Permission to be whole, even if someone else insisted on painting you in pieces. A week later, David brought June for her first sleepover. He had to convince Elena. He didn't tell me the details, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that I had one night with my granddaughter, and I wasn't going to waste a second of it. We baked cookies well. She mostly flung flour around and giggled like she'd invented joy. We read picture books, though. She kept turning the pages out of order. I let her. The story still made sense somehow. She fell asleep on my chest, her breath warm, and even her little hand curled around the button on my sweater. In that moment, I felt a fullness I hadn't known in years. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer pretending. The next morning, David picked her up. He hugged me longer than usual. "She didn't cry once," he said, eyes wide with surprise. "She was safe," I replied. Later that day, I found a note inside June's diaper bag. Not from Elena, her handwriting was too precise. This one was written in purple crayon, misspelled and wobbly. "Grandma Margaret." It wasn't much, but it was everything. I pinned it to my fridge and stood there staring at it for a long time, hand pressed gently to my chest. I had been labeled many things: burden, nuisance, overbearing, fragile. Now I had a new name, one given without permission or performance. Grandma Margaret. That night, I opened the folder one last time. Not to read the messages, not to feel righteous, just to close it for good. I tied it with string, placed it in a box, and tucked it into the back of my closet. The war was over, and I had won not with fire but with light. Years later, people would ask me how it ended. Did Elena ever apologize? Did she ever change? Did she find a way to make peace? The truth? No. She stayed who she was. Or perhaps more accurately, she doubled down on who she had always been. As David grew firmer in his boundaries, she sharpened hers into weapons. For every act of healing he tried to nurture, she countered with suspicion, with sarcasm, with icy withdrawals. Eventually they separated, quietly, without fireworks. Like the slow closing of a book neither of them wanted to read anymore. I wasn't happy about it. Divorce, even when necessary, is a wound. And June, well, she was the only one who hadn't chosen the battle. But I wasn't surprised either. Truth has a way of seeping into the cracks of a house, loosening every nail and lie that once held it upright. If you don't rebuild it properly, it caves in. David moved into a modest townhouse near the bookstore. June stayed with him during the week. Elena took weekends, though she often traded them away for emergencies and spa retreats. I didn't judge her. Not anymore. Judging requires energy. I had better uses for mine. June started calling my house her story place. Every Tuesday she came over after school, flung her backpack into the hallway, and ran straight to the little reading nook I had made for her. Pillows, fairy lights, stacks of books in rainbow colors. She'd pull one down, curl up under the throw blanket I'd quilted from the scraps of that first destroyed one, and wait for me to start. Pick the one with the talking moon, she'd say. Or, tell me about the cat who became a queen. I'd always oblige. One night she looked up at me mid-story and said, "You're my real home." It caught me off guard. I didn't cry. Not then. I just kissed the top of her head and said, "And you're mine." We built rituals from scratch. Pancakes on Thursdays. Dance breaks in the kitchen. Lavender sachets in her sock drawer. She started bringing over her drawings, stick figures of me and her and David in bright marker colors, always smiling, always surrounded by sun. One day I noticed a fourth figure in the corner. A little smaller, dressed in dark gray. "That's Mama," she said. I looked at her. "Why is she so far away?" She shrugged. "She says she's tired. All the time." I didn't respond. I didn't correct or critique. I just hugged her a little tighter, because I knew something Elena didn't. Children don't remember the perfect holidays or the expensive toys. They remember who made them feel seen, who sat still long enough to hear the whole story. David kept coming too. We never spoke much about the past. Some wounds don't need reopening. Instead, we created new memories to layer over the old ones. He helped me repaint the hallway. We planted tulips in the backyard. We co-hosted a reading day at the bookstore where he read picture books to toddlers in a voice that made the moms swoon and the kids squeal. He wasn't perfect, but he was present, and that mattered more. One evening, as we cleaned up after one of June's tea parties, he paused and said, "Do you think we're okay now?" I looked at him, at the little girl twirling in a tutu made from old scarves, at the warm kitchen filled with crumbs and laughter. "We're better than okay," I said. "We're honest." And that was more than I had ever hoped for. Some stories don't end with redemption. They end with understanding. In the quiet that followed everything after the accusations, the screenshots, the tears, the slow dismantling of a lie, I found something I hadn't expected to reclaim. Myself. Not the version of me filtered through someone else's fear or insecurity. Not the one rewritten in group chats or ignored during holidays. Just me, Margaret, mother, grandmother, woman with a spine made of steel and a heart stitched back together with thread from the truth. Elena never changed. She may never see me as anything other than a threat to the image she tried to uphold. And that's okay, because I no longer need her recognition to validate my reality. David came back not with excuses but with eyes open. We lost time. Years, really. But in its place we built something stronger. A bond rooted in honesty, not performance. And June. Sweet June. She became my mirror, my legacy, my little storyteller. Through her, I was no longer erased. I was magnified. The pain didn't disappear. It softened. It folded into the pages of a life well lived and now well guarded. I didn't seek revenge. I sought clarity. And in doing so, I carved out a peace no one can take from me. If you've ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed, let this story remind you. Your truth matters. Speak it. Hold it. Stand in it. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It simply outlasts the noise. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share my voice. And if you're sitting with your own quiet war, know this. You don't have to fight loud. You just have to hold your ground.